What's going on, guys? Chuck here. Today, I want to talk a little bit about a film that I don't think too many people have ever heard of or aware of, mainly because it was never distributed here in the States and then really any kind of home media or you know television. Well, obviously not television once you realize the content. So it's kind of been it's a controversial documentary that kind of got lost in the shuffle, but became really popular in Japan. And the film I'm talking about is from 1981. It's called The Killing of America, a brutal study of violence in the USA. Now, I've mentioned this before that I became familiar with this film through seeing the trailer on one of my trailer compilations. I can't tell you which one, I got so many of them. But I remember seeing it and it just intrigued me because it was a very, just from the trailer alone, I could tell it was pretty hard hitting and I dare I say gruesome. It and it definitely is that when you see the movie. But like I seen that trailer, I was like, wow, I wonder where that's at. I didn't know anything. I never heard of it. It was kind of it seemed very obscure, and definitely in the style of the Mondo films, which are like started with the film Mondo Kane, which I'm not an expert, but these kind of realistic, real life travel logs and kind of gruesome things, which became really popular in the late '70s and throughout the '80s. And I think most people in the States would probably be the average person, I guess, at least around my age, because this was a thing, would come to know this kind of film from Faces of Death, the infamous Faces of Death. You go on a video store, you'd see that, and you're like, as a teenage kid, that's the thing you had to see was Faces of Death, because it was real life death. Of course, you find out years later half of it's just a hoax. But that's you kind of get that idea really well. Of course, its reputation, is grown and there's been other imitators, if you will. But what the Killing of America is kind of goes beyond that. And where Face of Death is shockumentary in the entertainment sense of the word. Because that's really trying. It's trying to, shock you with, some real and some, faux death, if you will, for entertainment purposes. And I don't think, well, actually, I definitely would say that The Killing of America is not trying to shock you for entertainment purposes. It's trying to get a point across, and it does it in a very brutal way. The big thing about Killing of America is that everything in here, all this documentary footage, is 100% real, and it weaves an interesting narrative. Basically, the whole premise is kind of talking about how, how America has, kind of, I don't know what's the word. I don't know if I can't find the word I'm trying to use, but that violence has become more rampant from a specific starting point they give it to. The film basically it's kind of a chronological telling of some of the major violent events that occur between starting with the assassination of JFK. This is kind of what they call the starting point of when the Killing of America began. Which people talk about the how things in this country and the world changed when JFK was assassinated. The end of Camelot, if you will, and how violence seemed to take a rise from that point. And that's kind of what this film talks about. Is from that point on, you had, of course, the assassination of JFK, Martin Luther King Jr., eventually Robert Kennedy, and how talks about how political figures, elections started becoming decided by snipers or assassins. It really focuses a lot on gun violence mostly, but not just gun violence. It talks about just seeing certain violence on television and or not just like television, but the real life events you're seeing. And talks about the Vietnam War and again all these other different mass murders and how big they're becoming. It takes you along on police rides through, I think, Watts and Los in California, and you come along with some of these. I say domestic disputes. Actually, there's a couple of these, and there's that, but they also give you shocking stuff. I mean, like I said, you get a good look at the Zapruder film, which everyone has seen, the JFK Zapruder film. So that's not too big. They show you the footage of Oswald being shot, the footage from the Robert Kennedy assassination, when George Wallace was his attempt to assassinate the Ronald Reagan shooting, and taking through so many other events using real footage, and they take you in the morgues and show you real dead bodies and autopsies actually happening, not the fake stuff you might have saw on Face Dead, but the real deal. And it's disturbing. There's a lot of these things. It's all 100% real, but again, it's telling a narrative. It's taking you through, talking about Ted Bundy and Jim Jones and the Jonestown murders or massacre. I want to call them, murders, since they're all suicide. But through that, stuff you'd see on, hostage situations on television, where there's a famous one, I can't remember who it was, or they mentioned his name, but where he had held up a news studio or television studio, news studio, and holding the whole place up. There was one they mentioned, was in Indianapolis, about in the 70s, which went on for 3 days, where his guy was holding, I think it was an insurance agent or something, hostage by a shot collar with a bomb attached, and he was to be on the news. And they had all this archival real footage, and it's fascinating to watch. Of course, there's a talk of, Charles Manson. They show some, again, the footage in here is not pleasant. Some of this stuff, it's very graphic, it's very intense. But again, it's getting its point across. It's definitely not there just to shock and entertain, but it's really trying to get a point across is how the decline in this country and the increase in violence and what's happened. And it's interesting because this is 1981. We're talking about the increase in snipers, and there's a mention of the famous school shooting, where I can't remember the name, and I do apologize. There's so much information. It's funny because I saw a documentary about this recently, about the girl, I think she's 12, 13, whatever, who basically was shooting at a school across the street. Very famously, with her famous line is like, Mondays are boring, or I don't like Mondays, something like that's why she did it. The Boomtown Rats made a song, about that. So they talk about that. There's all the John Wayne Gacy, all these different serial killers. They actually had an interview with a real serial killer in jail, and this other where you're in court and seeing some of these trials. I mean, all this real 100% real stuff, and it's jarring. But again, the focus is on especially the gun violence and how people are getting access to guns and all stuff. Again, it's 1981. Of course, it's a very big thing now here in 2025 of gun violence and the ease of access to guns and the mass shootings and how do we control all this. So it's the word, it's still relevant, or the phrase is still relevant, is kind of thrown around a lot, but definitely this is very relevant today. But again, it's also an interesting, I don't want to say time capsule, but it really, it's a nice piece of history because, like I said, it starts off kind of like talking about the assassination of JFK, and it really ends with the assassination of John Lennon, which apparently happened while they were filming or putting this documentary together, kind of editing it together, and they were able to splice it in along with some stuff from the funeral. So again, all this stuff is just, I don't know. It does a good job at getting its point. It's not as hard a watch as I was expecting it to be. I mean, there's some graphic stuff in here, not for the squeamish. There's some really intense images. So you have to prepare yourself if you ever want to check that out. But as far as the documentary goes, it's very fascinating. And it's an interesting look at a time you tend to forget about, because we've got so much of this kind of stuff going on nowadays. You forget what's going on. The way the violence amped up so much right after, and they made a good point. Like I said, right after the JFK assassination, with through civil rights and all these different things, these different events just seem to escalate, over the years since that point. It's just again a very fascinating look at that particular time, and then and again it's a nice, or it's not nice, but interesting reflection on where we are as a society now, and it's kind of scary if you think about it. Um, so, The Killing of America. Do I recommend checking it out? It depends on you. Perfectly honest. I enjoyed it, as I enjoy documentaries, um, especially in a historical context. And a lot of this is historical, um, but for its time, it's present day. Looking at some of the present day as well as historical events. Like I said, this is 81. So the big thing here is, and you got the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan, which, like I said, talked about in, of course, John Lennon, with two biggies at this time as this was coming out. But all the history leading up to it is interesting to look at, and to remember. But again, enter at your own peril, if you will, because some of this stuff is not pleasant. It's graphic. Can be a little. It can make you a little squeamish, honestly, if you don't have an iron cast stomach, and you don't want to see that kind of stuff. That I steer away. But for, again, the as a documentary goes, I think it's a very good one. It does a really good job of telling us its narrative and explaining it in a very good way. So yeah, I'm glad I picked this up. I'm glad I checked it out. Again, not an easy watch, but it's not as, again, I was expecting it to be really, really violent and brutal, and it's not, honestly. And I honestly thought going in it was going to be kind of like a Faces of Death, throwing it at you for the sake of shocking you, and just for the entertainment value. But it's not. Again, it's there kind of putting a point across while still shocking you, but not for the sake of the shock, if that makes any sense. Now, this Blu-ray, so this is from Severin. I said this is the first time this is being released here, apparently. This was a big hit in Japan. One of the producers, I believe this was a Japanese man, whose name I don't have. I'm sure it's here somewhere. Masahiro Yamamoto, I believe it was. And in doing so, there is actually a Japanese cut on here, which is a longer cut. I did not watch it. I watched the regular theatrical cut, which is a shorter one, 95 minutes. And I just started watching the Japanese one, and of course it's narrated in Japanese as opposed to English, and it is called, actually, Violence USA is actually its title. But from what I can tell, and this goes with the editor on this who's interviewed, he talks about it, that cut is the biggest difference in here is there's a lot of the opening that's kind of showing how all the good in America, because you open up, you're like over sweeping landscapes like the Grand Canyon and all these different happy things, as opposed to in the original theatrical cut, you're just jumping right into, a guy getting shot in the street and then the police being called. You're jumping right into the action right away. This is kind of, and as they put it, is because they didn't want to sour things with America by just immediately saying America's a horrible place. They want to show all the beauty of it first before telling you how bad it is. So I think that's I'll enjoy the extra 10 minutes of it. Basically, making into an early puff piece before diving into the violence, which I find interesting, considering this did so well in Japan. So special features on here. Again, you have the English language version, which is a 2K scan from the original negative. It runs 95 minutes. The Japanese language is also 2K scan from the original negative, 115 minutes. There is an audio commentary with the director, which I think I would go back and watch, because there's an interview with him on here, which is very interesting, because he doesn't take a lot of credit for the directing, because he said he was more the guy who was able to get the archive footage. He collected a lot of stuff as being in film or whatever, but I forgot what exactly he did, but he had ways of documenting and having records of a lot of these events. You can able to get access to a lot of this archive footage that he was able to put in here. So that's kind of what he took more credit for than actually being a director of the piece. Then you have That's the Madness is Real, was the interview with director Sheldon Reenan. So, like I said, I like to listen to his commentary on that. You have the Cutting the Killing, an interview with editor Lee Percy, which is an interesting. He talks about how he didn't get in editing, but he gets into it, and he just decided to put this together, and he's the one who gives more information about the Japanese cut and what they had to do, and how a lot of people weren't too thrilled with it, but it is what it is. Then you have an interview with Mondo movie historian Nick Pinkerton, which is kind of like a real quick. It's only about 10 minutes or so, but it's a quick run through of the history of these Mondo films, and the violent, realistic kind of films that were popular around that time. And of course, you have the theatrical trailer. So, yeah, Killing of America is very interesting, very grim, and at times hard to watch documentary. But I think if you can stomach it, it's worth taking a look at. And again, I say if you stomach, like it's not Face of Death gross, okay? And a lot of that again is just for shock value. Like I said, this is not doing that. I mean, there's stuff that's like, oh my gosh, but it's not like, like party kind of thing. Like, that's basically what Face. You get the other kids face death and try and survive Faces to see how cool you are. This isn't that movie. This has got, like I said, got something to say, and it's making its point, and it's doing it in a serious fashion. It's not giving you the more or less tongue in cheek of something like Faces of Death. So, again, if you can handle a very hard hitting and graphic documentary, then try and check out Killing America. Actually, I think it's streaming. I believe it's on Amazon Prime of all places. I was kind of surprised looking through. So you might be able to check it out and see what you think. So that is it for this one. If you enjoyed this, click thumbs up, share, subscribe, leave me a comment below. Let me know if you've heard of or seen Killing of America. I'd be interested to know how many are actually aware of it. When I did my Severin video, the titles I got, and I mentioned it, I did get some comment. They knew about it. They had seen it. So that's one person. If there's anybody out there who has heard of it or seen it, let me know, and let me know your thoughts on it. Or just say hi. I'll always take hi. So until next time, this is Chuck saying I will see you on the other side.